G'day learners, and in this video we're going to be looking at multiplying fractions. So hopefully by the end of this, there's a bit to get through, so hopefully by the end of this you can understand how we can multiply fractions, and we're using written strategies or even digital technologies in doing this. But before we begin, I've got a question for you, and it says, to understand how we multiply fractions, what does it mean to multiply two fractions together? So that by that I mean, how do you multiply a part of a number by a part of another number? For example, we've got a couple of things here. So when we multiply whole numbers, what we get, or our product, is bigger than the multipliers. Okay, so when we do 5 times 7, that equals 35, and that is bigger than both 5 and 7. But what happens when we actually multiply fractions is that we get a smaller product. So in this example here, when we have 1/3 times 2/5, we get 2/15. And in the previous video, we looked at how comparing or ordering fractions, and we know that 2/15 is smaller than 1/3 and 2/5. So it can get kind of complicated, but I want to use a visual example here to help us understand that in a bit more detail. So what I have here is 1/3 times 2/5. And what I've got here is I've coloured in 2/5, and when we use 2 times, we kind of mean of. And when I say 1/3, so basically it's saying 1/3 of 2/5. So in this hole here, I've covered in or coloured in 2/5, and I need to find 1/3 of 2/5. So here I've got the 2/5 part, and I want to find 1/3 of this. So what I have to do is that I've got to create, if I create 1/3 of this side now, okay, so I'm going to create thirds, sorry for the terrible lines there, but I'm going to separate this side now into thirds. So I've got this section here, and I want to colour in 1/3 of that, and I know that's going to be these two boxes here. Okay, so I'm colouring in 1/3 of 2/5. Now what I can do now is that if I find all of them together, or add up these two out of the whole, I am left with, so I've got two boxes here, covered out of the whole, sort of out of all these up, that makes 15. When we're doing multiplying fractions, we're making a small part of another part, and we actually end up with smaller numbers. So let's get into the nitty gritty of it now, and I'll get you to write, before we begin, there's a couple of key points that we need to understand when we're multiplying fractions. The first is that fractions do not have to have the same denominator when they're multiplied. So you know when we did addition and subtraction, we had to have the same denominator before we could do anything. That doesn't apply here to multiplication. We can just multiply two fractions together, and they don't need to have the same denominator. And as I said before, the term of means times and vice versa. So when we say 1/3 of 2/5, it's the same as saying 1/3 times 2/5. And that's going to become really important later on. Now a whole number, if you're multiplying a fraction by a whole number, we can convert that whole number to a fraction, and we just put it above the denominator of 1. For example, 6 as a fraction is written as 6/1. Now the other key thing that we need to make sure is that mixed numbers, we need to change them to improper fractions before multiplying. That's a key part there. And finally, when we're answering questions, that we put them in simplest form. So make sure you have those 5 key, maths manners that you can put down before we continue. So let's get into it now, and we want to work out how do we actually multiply fractions. And there's 3 steps that I want you to apply. The first is cancel, and we're going to look at what cancelling means soon. But the first thing you do is cancel the fractions if possible. You then multiply the numerators together, and then multiply the denominators together, and finally you then simplify again if that is possible. So what we're going to look at quickly is how to cancel, or what we mean as simplify, when we do this before we multiply. And the reason for this is that if we're multiplying, we're going to get big numbers, and we always want to make sure that we can simplify or have our fractions into simplest form. So if we can simplify or cancel before we get to that point, it actually really helps us in the end by having a simpler fraction. And the way that we cancel is that cancel can be done both vertically or diagonally, but never horizontally. So by that I mean we're looking for a common factor, or the highest common factor. You should have understood that from a previous video, between two numbers, and we can break it down further. So let's look at these examples. We have 3/5 times 4/8, and we're going to work vertically. So that means within the one section. So I know here that 4/8 is also, I can cancel, they both have a common factor of 4. So 4/8 is really saying over a half. Okay, so really that is saying 3/5 times a half. And when we do that, we're going to actually get it in simplest form. It's much better than if we're timesing 3/4 or 5/8, because then the numbers get too big. We can also cancel diagonally, and by that I mean the opposite numerator and the opposite denominator. So you can cancel on the opposite side diagonally. In this case here, okay, I can't cancel 5 and 4 because they don't have a common factor, but I know I can cancel 3 and 6. Sorry about that there. I know I can cancel 3 and 6 because they both have a common factor of 3. So this will be 1/5 and this will be 4/3. Okay, so that's how we can cancel diagonally, but we never cancel horizontally. So that by that I mean you don't go across like that way. Don't cancel that way, because that's how we actually do our multiplication. We're going to look at examples of how we do that, and then we'll get into that now. So we're going to do a couple of examples, and we're going to be multiplying two fractions. We'll multiply some fractions by a whole number, and we'll also multiply some mixed numbers, so we get a good idea of what that looks like across the board. So remember the steps are, firstly, you want to cancel. You then multiply the numerators together, and then you simplify if possible. So firstly, we want to make sure we change. We know that of means times, so we're going to say 3/4 times 8/9. I'm going to look for my opportunity to cancel now, and I know I can work in both directions. So I'm going to change my color here just for visuals. Okay, I know I can cancel diagonally here because 4 and 8 both have a common factor of 4. So this one will be 1 and this one will be 2. Sorry. And I also can cancel this way because I know they both have a common factor of 3. So this one will be 1 and this one will be 3. So now I have a new fraction of 1/1 multiplied by 2/3, and then I can move to my next step, which, as you know, is just multiplying the numerators and denominators together. So 1 times 2 equals 2, and 1 times 3 equals 3. So 3/4 times by 8/9 equals 2/3. So again, the process was cancel, multiply the numerators together, then multiply the denominators together, and then you got the answer, and simplify if possible. So let's look at how we do that now with a whole number. So I'm going to write this down first. So I have 2/5 of, I know means times, and when I have 32, and we looked at previously what a whole number is, you just put that above a denominator of 1. Okay, so I have 2/5, 32/1. So now I can actually just cancel, or I can just do two fractions multiplying together. So I'm going to look for opportunities to cancel. Now I can't do that way because it's a 5 and a 2, they don't go together. And I can't do a 1 and a 2 anyway because 1 is the smallest that you can go. So all we need to do here is multiply numerators and denominators together. 2 times 32 equals 64, and 5 times 1 equals 5. So now that I have a improper fraction, I want to turn this into a mixed number, because that will give us, as we said, I want to use our maths manners. So I'm going to convert this here quickly to a mixed number, and then we can continue from there. Okay, so I know that 5 goes into 64 12 times, so it'll be 12 whole, with 4 left over, and 5 the denominator stays as is. Alright, now the last one here, we want to look at multiplying two mixed numbers together, and the first step is that you need to convert them both to improper fractions. So the rule is, as always, when converting to an improper fraction, you multiply the whole number by the bottom and then add the top. Okay, so 2 times 3 equals 6 plus 1 equals 7/3. And I'm timesing that by multiply by the bottom number and then add the top. So 1 times 5 equals 5 plus 2 equals 7. So I have 7/5. And now I can simply do my multiplication process. Okay, let's look for cancelling opportunities. Okay, I can't cancel diagonally, so I can just go simply into my multiplication of numerators and denominators. So 7 times 7, and it'll be 3 times 5. So I have 49/15, and then I can simply convert this into a mixed number. So how many times does 15 go into 49? I know that 15 times 3 will equal 45, with 4 left over. over 15. So that's how we can cancel and multiply fractions. And make sure any questions that you have, make you write them down. But there's a lot to get through in this lesson, but hopefully you can understand the key parts of that. And if you follow those simple strategies, we'll be able to go further into more detail. Thanks, guys.